Hey, Randy.
Well,
Episode
hey, it's
19, I
good.
think. I lost count. I was
I
gone for a
think you're
while,
right.
and
I think
so
you're right. It's good to have you back in the States. While
good to be
some of
back.
us were in the Andes in South America toiling away,
Yeah,
others of us were cruising through the Greek Isles.
yeah,
Hope you
yeah.
had a good trip,
It
but it's
was it
really
was
good to have
awesome.
you back in the States.
Good to be back. Good to be back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it was funny. So Cassie and I thought for sure we were on the right time zone, that we would be able to watch a lot of the British Open without having to be up at weird hours. I watched zero other than watching on social media and some what happened. Could not get anything to do with the British Open. YouTube TV won't play in Greece. I couldn't through any method. I could not watch any of the US Open, but I saw the World Cup final 3 times. So there was that.
oh, yeah. Well, that's a reminder of where you were.
Yeah, yeah. They
But
don't care a lot
yeah,
about
I can.
golf and they love soccer. So
Yeah, much the same was true here. Nobody cared about the British Open because nobody in Ecuador cares about golf. But even after Ecuador got knocked out, it's amazing how big football is
it
around
is.
the world.
Everywhere we were at this restaurant. They got your fish gets cooked over a volcano. There's some volcanic sand. It's the only active volcano on this. They cook your fish in this volcano sand. But the World Cup final started while we were there, and there was a table of, I don't know, 20 people that they kind of glommed together. Super nice restaurant. They bought two of the biggest Magnum bottles of wine I've ever seen in my life. They finished one and were on the second one when we were still sitting there. But we're like, what are they doing? And they put up on a projector, they put the World Cup up, and that whole restaurant turned into a World Cup party.
Yeah,
So it was pretty
yeah,
cool.
I believe it. I believe it. Well, listen, we're in the third and final review, as it were, on our part of the Libertarian Party platform. And it's really interesting. I didn't do a whole lot of background research on this particular section only because number one, it's paragraph 3.0, which is their concept of securing the liberty of the individual, and it is absolutely critical to the first two paragraphs. If this particular section of the Libertarian Party platform is not carried out, then the first two sections would not be able to survive. So I found it really interesting, and also many of the as I was looking at this, many of the points in this particular section of their party, I had sort of thought about even before I knew what a libertarian was. And in many instances, kind of in agreement with them on where they stand on many of these issues relating to ensuring that our liberty as individuals is protected. At the same time, I look through this and I see that while some of this makes sense, there is not a lot of time spent on exactly how they would pull some of this off. Because I think some of it may be a little bit of sort of pie in the sky wishing and may not be practical in terms of actually trying to run a government. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm really anxious to get your take on this because I've had a position on many of these issues long before I knew what libertarianism was. But their opening paragraph about securing liberty, and I'm going to try to stay within what they have published. They believe that there in the Constitution, there are constitutional limits that are placed on the government, and those limits are intended to prevent the infringement of on individual rights by those who are in power. And I have absolutely no problem with that, and I completely agree that the rights and the freedoms of the individual are of the utmost importance, and that the Constitution, as it is written, is heavily geared toward protecting the individual from those who happen to be in power. It's interesting that they follow up by saying that the only proper purpose of government, and it's interesting they put this word in there, should it exist, which leaves an open door to the possibility that maybe government shouldn't exist. But if it does have a reason to exist, it is only for the protection of individual rights. Now, that covers a broad area because that also has to do with security from other countries who may try to harm us and in that way infringe upon our individual rights. So there's kind of a broad application of that. But then the other thing that I think very much colors the libertarian concept of international relations and foreign policy is the principle of what they call the non-initiation of force, and that should always be what guides the relationship between governments. Now, if indeed one is going to buy into that, and I happen to agree with them, then what is going on in Iran right now is completely in opposition to the libertarian philosophy of
Yeah.
government.
Yeah, well, let me
Right or
go back
wrong.
real quick and say something on the individual piece, before we kind of move into the defense and all that. So, fully agree. I think words matter. Liberty, libertarian, both very much rooted in the Constitution. I mean, I think the single word, if you sum up the Constitution, the most important part of every one of the founding documents, it was individual, God given, liberty. That's really, if you have that and you honor that, a lot of the other things aren't needed. So I think it's I haven't thought as much about it until we've done this. But if you look at why are they called libertarians, well, they're trying to preserve individual liberty. That's the top of the food chain. I think that's why when you and I dive into some of these, it very closely aligns to the Constitution, which I think we've gotten way away from with our kind of two party slash uniparty, whatever it really is, system. And a lot of these things have been bastardized. And I think one of the roots that's interesting to me, and I've heard this discussion a lot, and no good politician lets any big event, tragedy go to waste without seizing that as an opportunity to gain control. And I think one of the conundrums, and it gets into even what you're going to say, but at an individual level, even, and it's what's used a lot of times, is where is the line between liberty and safety? And because a lot of things, liberty it gets infringed upon in the name of safety. And I think the libertarian view is okay, sure. And it's kind of what you're going to get into at a national level, but even at a national level, but it affects the individuals. Let's say there's an emergency, there's an event, there's a 9/11, whatever. Well, that always begets these liberty infringing things. Patriot Act, NSA surveillance, COVID creates emergency powers, all these different things, social media monitoring and censoring. All those were rooted in a thing, right? A lot of that came out of
Right.
COVID. The Patriot Act came out of 9/11. And at the time, it's like, man, we don't want terrorists attacking us. So, yeah, the Patriot Act, that's good. And if you don't take that to an extreme and say, okay, what if, Hitler gets, what if he gets elected president? What's he going to do with the Patriot Act? Some of the stuff seems, and I think I'll give people the benefit of the doubt. I think their original intent might have been good, at least some people. I think there's
Right.
always
Right.
nefarious organizations and bureaucracy that's trying to gain power for the sake of getting power. I think the problem is none of these things are ever temporary. And so I could be willing, because at the crux of a lot of this stuff is it really is the tension between liberty and safety. Those two are in direct conflict with each other, because the more liberty you have means the less oversight, the less cameras you have on streets, all these things that are done supposedly to keep society safe. And if you just say we're going to give people the benefit of the doubt and say that's why they're doing it, that infringes on liberty. So where is the line? How much safety do you want? How much liberty are you willing to give up? And I think that's intriguing. The problem is it is never something that starts and is walked back 6 months later or a year later. Everything seems to tend toward, in the name of safety, less liberty.
Right.
The Patriot Act's a good example. And I think that's one of the, an emergency, you need to act, you need to do it. But when do those emergency powers end? I don't
Right.
think the debate is really should the government act. I think most people, even libertarians, say, yeah, in a situation like a 9/11, you got to do something.
Crisis.
TSA.
Sure.
But should it always be that you got to take off your shoes and do all these crazy things and strip naked to walk through the X-ray machine before you get on an airplane? Because somebody may bring a bomb in their shoe. I don't know, but it just seems that tension between liberty and safety is always the debate. The safety side is always, well, you can't have ultimate freedom, because if you do have freedom and liberty, then we're not going to be safe. Okay, that's a valid argument, but the pendulum never moves back toward balancing liberty and safety. It uses every crisis to move more toward safety and less liberty. So I think it's a
Right.
interesting conundrum.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think that in section 3.0 of their platform, the libertarians attempt to address that conundrum. I'm not sure that they are 100% successful. For example, when they talk about national defense, they state that they support the maintenance of what they call a sufficient military to defend the United States against aggression. Now, you and I have talked about this before. I'm one of those that happens to believe that we should do everything within our power as a nation to protect the American continent, North, Central, and South America, from one pole to the other. And that is really where our emphasis should be in terms of national defense. And so whatever size of military, whatever level of technology within our military capabilities should be focused on that. I'm not sure that's where our focus is, but I think that's where it should be. Now, they state that the United States should avoid entangling alliances, i.e., Israel,
Oof. Yeah,
and
that's pretty
abandon
relevant right
its
now, isn't it?
right and abandon its attempts to act as policemen of the world. Okay. And in this particular arena, as a good old libertarian thinking independent, I totally agree. I will carry it so far as to say we should abandon our involvement in the United Nations. We should abandon our involvement in NATO because Europe needs to take care of Europe. The United Nations has not proven its ability to impact anything in the world other than maybe UNICEF. I don't know. Maybe they do some
None
good
of those
things for
organizations, though, with NATO, the United Nations, how do those benefit us? It's
they
us
don't.
being the world's police and protector, but no, we got 2 big oceans that
Exactly.
help us. We don't need either one of
Right.
them. You know, and some of these
Absolutely.
alliances, and there's a lot of discussion. You sent me the article the other day, and it's interesting if you start drilling down, which I had plenty of time to do flying and sitting in airports, of the further alliance between Israel and the United States. And some of it's codifying some things that are already there. It's being used as political
Right.
talking
Sure.
points. And
Sure.
but regardless, there is a super, super strong alliance, you know, that has
Mhm.
led to us. I don't think anybody can argue that it's not at least some, whether it's all or 10% of the reason that we're fighting Iran right now. Israel is at the center of that. And the amount of, for a state that's the size of, I don't know, Maryland or whatever the heck it is, you know, we've spent a lot of money in support of them. And I think there's some things that get, it's also, if you speak out against Israel, you become an anti-Semite. No, just because you say something about
Right.
the Israeli government doesn't necessarily mean that you're anti-Jew, but that gets
Right.
conflated and it's being used
Right.
and you get labeled an anti-Semite right now. It was interesting in Greece. So, and I went and did a lot of research, more graffiti in Athens per capita than I've ever seen anywhere. But I noticed it in Athens when we flew in. I noticed it on both islands. A lot of anti-Israel, pro-Palestine, free Gaza. And so I started looking at it. Well, Greek Orthodox, but the Greeks have not aligned with the Israelis as a
Right.
country to country until really the last 15 years. So there's still a lot of sentiment that's not, they've been more pro Palestine. And again, it's not anti Semitism and I saw no comments against Jewish. It's the Israeli state. And I think those two things get conflated sometimes. But, you know, I look at what has that alliance with Israel done for us. Again, it's helped them, no doubt, and we can have a whole
Right.
different debate of whether we're helping them or not. Clearly, we are. They can't defend themselves without us. But to your original point and the libertarians' point, how is any of that benefiting us? Right now, I could argue it's not benefiting us at all. We're in a freaking war that now all of a sudden Ukraine is shooting at Iran. So the two different fronts are now becoming one because Russia is, you know, being backed and working with Iran. So Ukraine's pissed off at Iran. Well, Russia could look at Ukraine and say, we're the ones supporting them and start shooting at us. I mean, Bob and I talked about this today. Bob's much older than I am, but in my 52 years, and I told him probably 42 of those years, I didn't know what the heck I was talking about and wasn't as interested. But in my life, I don't think we've been at a bigger crossroads. And we came up with some analogies. Like we're in the end of a chapter. Is it the end of the chapter of the book, or is it the last page of a chapter? It's a major crossroads. When you go back, it's like
Right.
Putin, you know, tearing out, or Gorbachev tearing down the wall. That was a big moment that changed, you know, kind of the course of human history. There's a number of things going on with China, you know, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, us, Iran. Things are very tense geopolitically,
Mhm.
and you know we're kind of halfway down a last page. It's hard to say if it's the last page of what, but man, there's some significance of things. And Bob said, I said that, and Bob said, completely agree. I said, well, again,
Mhm.
your worldview is a lot longer than mine is, but there's a lot going on, and you could make the argument if we went back to the libertarian thing, would we be there? You know, would all these things
Right.
be, because there's a common thread with a lot of this freaking problem, and it's us. We're involved on three different fronts of things right now. So
Right.
I don't know. It's
None
hard to
of
say.
which, and I'll be honest with you, I went back and took a look at. I knew a little bit about the history of Iran, and here's the thing: we are not going to win that. Period. It is not going to happen. We are not going to come out the victors. You're talking about you're talking about a culture, you're talking about a country that has existed since 550 BC. Many world powers have temporarily brought them under control. The Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, but they've always come out. They are one of the oldest dynasties, civilizations that have existed pretty much uninterrupted since 550 BC. And we think we are in some way, and I understand, as he is prone to do. Our president totally miscalculated because he does not care about history.
Yeah, I think
He
he believes
thought
he can
that
negotiate with them, and again,
well,
you can
that
keep.
or he thought that Iran was gonna be like Venezuela. We'll
No,
go
I think he
in and we'll
underestimated.
hit them real quickly and we'll be
Yes.
done and we'll walk away from
And I've
this.
said all
And
along,
he
Randy, this is a different war than Iraq, Afghanistan. It's a
yes,
different thing.
yes, it
And,
is.
ideologically, it's not much different, but the ability to stand up for what you believe in, Iran can do that. And I
Right.
think it's interesting because I think Trump and others significantly underestimated what that was going to look like. And again, I don't think we can underestimate Bibi Netanyahu and his involvement in what he's doing. I
Mhm,
don't like him at all right now. The fact that he's at Lindsey Graham's funeral tells you a lot about Lindsey Graham's alliance. Why there's a world leader at
mhm.
his funeral. He drug us into the war, whether there was agreement or not. But clearly, there was some arm twisting from him to Trump and others. But I think we were convinced, and my guess is Bibi knows how to play Trump. Everybody does.
Sure.
You play to his ego, and man, that was easy in Venezuela. We can do the same thing there. You're going to be a hero. Everybody's going to love you, and that's probably enough to get him involved in some things. And then there's probably some different coercion that happened as well. $380 million campaign contribution that's
Yeah, that'll
pro
get your attention.
pro-Israeli probably makes you have to listen to that conversation more. But I think militarily it was underestimated. But then I think, and Trump is able to negotiate a lot of things. I think he's arrogant enough to think that he could go blow them up and then they're going to listen and he's going to get his way and negotiate this into some kind of world peace. It looks so ridiculous. I listened to Mike Baker, his presidential daily brief every day, and it's so funny. He every day it's like, okay, ceasefire that doesn't feel a lot ceasy. Oh, now we're negotiating again, and it's like it's like Groundhog Day. It's every third day. We blow the hell out of them for 13 days. Now we're gonna diplomacy's the thing, and it's just like, what are we doing? We look
Right.
stupid. It's
Well,
it's
we do. And
ridiculous.
Iran, what we don't understand or what we're failing to see is that the Iranian people are much more willing to endure much more pain and discomfort than we
Yes,
are in the United States.
yes.
And that's just the facts. Okay.
Well, and
And
we talked
especially
about
given
doing
the fact,
a podcast on, world. The biggest thing I said after coming back from Greece and while we're on the way back is we've got it so freaking easy in the United States. I mean, it's not like I was in a poverty-stricken area of Greece. We were in nice islands in Greece, but even there and in Athens, it's harder. Everything's harder. The people are working harder.
mhm.
Just doing normal things is harder. You can't flush toilet paper down the toilets. My daughters didn't like that a lot. Everything is more difficult. We're very spoiled in the US. And that does play into when you get into a conflict negotiation battle. If you haven't had to endure pain, and as a country, we haven't had to endure a lot of pain probably since the World Wars, the Great Depression. Yes, we've had some isolated pain. We've had soldiers who've gone through immense pain. But as a nation, we haven't suffered a lot of pain. And these places have for many, many years.
And that's what I think we don't understand. Now, I am firmly convinced that if it were our nation that were being bombed by the Iranians, that we would see the American people come together,
Yes.
willing to endure the pain and whatever hardship it took to emerge victorious and defend themselves. But we don't understand. That is not the perspective that we have. And yet the Iranians do. They understand that. And they've
Yes.
understood it for 4,000 years. So let's not kid ourselves into thinking that we're going to, in some way, I saw where, it appears that they are rebuilding their capabilities for nuclear production. And Trump just kind of offhandedly says, I will just blow the heck out of that then. Number one, you may or may not be successful. We don't even know how successful we were the first time. But you know
Yeah.
what? They'll just rebuild.
Yeah.
And
Nuclear
you blow the heck
capability
out of
is
that, and
simply
they'll
it's
just
simply
rebuild.
knowledge and some equipment and money. It's not
Right.
like it's
Right.
it's not this thing. It's a concept. If you want to have nuclear capability, you can get it, especially when you got Russia as a friend. They're
Right.
going to help you. So, and North
Right.
Korea.
Well, let's get back to our national defense. The other thing that the Libertarian Party says, and at first questioned this, but if you were to adopt the idea that we should not be the policemen of the world, that we should not be entangling ourselves with other foreign governments, etc., they oppose any form of the draft, any form of compulsory national service. That would not have worked in World War II. We were fighting two different fronts. We ended up with, 10 million soldiers being involved, and you could not meet the demands of that. But if you were to reduce your involvement to simply a protection of the Americas and not getting involved in foreign wars elsewhere, I'm not sure that a draft would ever be necessary. And particularly in today's forms of combat, which do not involve
It's not
as
boots on the
many
ground.
boots on the ground,
Yeah.
etc. So I'm willing to give the Libertarian Party a pass on even on that. That maybe we don't need the draft, we don't need compulsory service, and should the United States ever truly become endangered by a foreign power that required individuals to be willing to serve in the military, I think that the American people would step up.
Yeah. I've
But
got two
so I'm
questions
I'm
for
willing to
you
let
on
that
the.
pass.
No, I agree, and some of the things that we're going to talk about, it's hypothetical. We can't go unscrew what all's been done and say, oh, well, what would have happened if this? Who knows? We can hypothetical it to death, but I think it's an interesting discussion because yeah, I was listening to a Navy SEAL at lunch today, and he was asked, what was it like the first time you killed somebody, and he went through it, and then he ended up saying one of the hardest things was after he killed the father of a family, and they walked the wife and the kids by the dad and he's dead. He said, depending on the age of the kids, I saw something from sheer terror and horror. And he said, I wanted to tell him I didn't want to do this either, but your dad was going to kill me. He had on a suicide vest. He said, but then as I watched the teenage kids, it went from sadness and horror to friggin' hatred. He said, I saw something in them. And there's a lot of sayings that we created, the next generation of terrorists, and they're more dedicated than ever because of things like that. Those kids that lost their dad, you don't think they're going to hate us more. And he's like, that was almost more terrifying knowing what we had done, that we
Mm.
just hardened a whole nother generation of terrorists and the look on their face. But here's two hypotheticals for you. So, and this is it's a pro, we should be involved in other place question that gets asked a lot is, and I've heard Mike Baker talk about this, is like, if we don't go meddle in foreign elections and we don't do these things, what's going to happen with the vacuum? Because vacuums get sealed. Is Russia going to do it? Is China going to do it? Who's going to do it? You really can't answer that question. But I
Right.
do wonder, and I'm curious your take on kind of two things, that one, and then I want to get into kind of genocide and some of that. But on the take of what if we don't get involved, and maybe not so proactively, maybe not the Iran thing, but where's the threshold? And if we aren't ever involved and we pull out and we bring the CIA home and we quit doing intel and we quit meddling in foreign elections and figuring out who we want to be the leaders, does somebody else do that? And if so, is that better or worse than what we're doing? I'm curious your thoughts on.
Well, that's a good question, and I have given some thought to that. And if history has proven anything to us, it is replete with examples of so-called world powers that attempted to exercise the control over broad swaths of the world, and they all failed. And in some instances, it took some time, but every one of them failed. Russia will not control Europe. They simply can't. China will not control Asia and Southeast Asia. They can try, and they may be able to influence things for a while, but ultimately they cannot, nor can the United States. And we all need to understand that. So I have absolutely no fear of us creating a vacuum in Europe that the Russians are going to come in and take charge of. The Russians, I don't believe, could beat Europe now. I mean, they can't beat that right now. It doesn't appear they can
They're
beat
not beating
Ukraine.
Ukraine. They're going backwards right now.
So, and I am not concerned. I do believe that the greatest fear that I have is the Chinese, and it's not their military might.
That's
It's the fact
economic.
that they're smart enough to figure out that they're going to be, that if you can control economies and then exercise some amount of control over your own people, that you have a greater chance of influencing. I don't think the Chinese have any intention of ever taking the United States. They have no interest in it. Why?
Yeah, they
What
don't
do they
have to.
gain?
Yeah.
Nothing. They would much rather sell cheap merchandise to the United States,
We're their biggest
to these
customers.
people.
They need us to keep doing well to keep buying their stuff.
Right.
So
So
I tend
I'm
to
not
agree with you. who knows? But I think it's an interesting thought experiment that
Yeah. No, absolutely.
it hasn't been tried very well. Nobody's just kind of stayed home and quit messing with everybody else and see what happens throughout human history.
Right.
Humans want even primates. If you watch Chimp Empire on Netflix or whatever it's on, it's hilarious. They go study all these chimps, and even the chimps want to go invade their neighbors, take over. So I don't know that for many years any primates have done a good job of not meddling in their neighbors' stuff.
That's
So
probably true.
anyway, the other thing is, this is something, to whom much is given, much is expected. We are a very powerful, very wealthy nation, clearly. And this is not as much a governmental as it is a moral responsibility. And then you get into it's the same thing we talked about with free speech is who's the arbiter of what's right and wrong. And but there is a line when you start gassing people and you start committing true genocide. What's our moral obligation? Because we have been blessed a lot with a lot of resources and ability to do things. I mean, is that the line? And then how many is it? Is if you kill 10, it's fine, but if you kill 100, that's a problem. And then if you kill 1,000, but when you see human atrocity, and the problem is, this is where I don't think we're doing that now. I don't think that's a real reason we do a lot of things. I think oil and other things end up being our reasons to do things. Because if so, we sure as hell would have been in a lot of other third world countries and parts of Africa and things a lot more heavily because of the human atrocities that go on there. But I'm curious your take. I mean, that's where morally I look at it. Again, I struggle with who's going to be the arbiter, and maybe it's when the people ask, and I don't know how they ask, but how do we deal with that? Is that a nope? We just turn a blind eye and stay home. I worry that we would have a reckoning, and we'd have to answer to that at some point. Curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think you hate to relegate answers, moral issues to moral dilemmas to numbers, but 3 million people, 3 million Jews and other ethnic minorities murdered by the Third Reich is a horrible thing. Is losing 14 million soldiers on both sides of the war the proper trade-off? I don't know.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
tough.
know that I know the answer to that.
But again, we're selective with it. China kills a bunch of Uyghurs, what they did in Hong Kong,
Right.
what they're still doing, and we don't do
Mhm.
that because that seems like a bridge
Right.
too far, and that's going so we're
Right.
very selective in our moral, enforcing of human rights. We sure do turn a blind eye to some, and we
We're we're not
conveniently get
doing
involved
anything
in
to
others.
North Korea, and we could take them out.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the one thing we do know is we could take them out, and yet we refuse to because there's no benefit.
yeah.
What
And
is
I
the
think that's
benefit to the
that's
US?
the thing that really bothers me is because I could get behind. I don't like to see women, children, innocent people being murdered by their government. That's a real problem. Whether it's one or however many, I think that's a real issue. The problem is we seem to do that in places that benefit us so that we can get something after we do that. We selectively enforce that based on who it is and where it is and kind of what natural resources. If it's a good excuse for us to go meddle and exercise the military and help Lockheed sell more missiles, then it seems like that's when we do it.
Well, it makes you wonder what is the true motivation behind that? Is it really altruism? I don't think so. It's what
And
can we
never
get
on
in
the back
return?
end of it, it sure seems like that's the convincing argument up front, but it sure seems like history never pans out once you read the real story of how it happened that was the real reason. So
Let's move into another thing that you already touched on a little bit, but the idea of maintaining internal security in our nation when it comes into conflict with individual rights. Now, the 3.2 of the Libertarian platform says that individual rights should not be curtailed whether based on circumstances of war, epidemic, natural disaster, or emergency, or any other pretense. Let's go to COVID, in which the government stepped in and curtailed the ability of certain companies to operate, people to go to work, except under, certain circumstances, etc. What's your feeling there? I mean, I'm inclined, and this is in retrospect and looking back, I'm inclined to agree with them. Now, that does not mean that in the midst of COVID, if I decide I want to go into Walmart without a mask, that Walmart does not have the right to prohibit me from entering their store. That is a business decision, which should be their decision
yeah,
and not the government's.
yeah,
But for the government to step in,
my whole issue with all that, again, if individuals don't want you in their house, businesses don't want you, I can go find another business. the
Right.
mandates, and it's around the vaccine
Right.
and it's around the shutting down a bit. And now the more you find out, and Fauci's about to get grilled again because his diary is really damning of what he thought about it all. He thought he was a rock star. It's awful.
Right.
He's got a
Right.
history of killing people with AZT, like Arthur Ashe. So that's a whole different. But the mandates is what really bothered me. It's similar to helmet laws. If you don't wear a helmet when you ride a motorcycle and you have a wreck, it will in no way impact me. Zero chance. I don't care. Same thing with, and it became true. Masks were so ridiculous that all got proven false. But just take the vaccine. What they were saying became evident. It wasn't true at all. Is if I took the vaccine, I wasn't really protecting you. If you could prove that factual, that making me do it protected the greater whole, we might can have a discussion. But when very quickly it became evident that it wasn't helping the whole, and it wasn't really the mandates, like, what are we doing? Again, if it's only
Right.
protecting me, I get to make the decision if I want to do it or not. And it was
Right.
funny, we've talked a little bit about this, but the my body, my choice, there was a little bit of confusion on that when you look at abortion versus mandates on vaccine, because the same people that are pro-abortion, my body, my choice, didn't think it was your body, your choice of whether or not you got to choose to get a vaccine. So yeah, the mandates were my big issue with all of how that was handled, the shutting down of businesses, the mask mandates, because all of those were proven that if you just are charitable, that they didn't help the greater population. If you say, okay, maybe it helped the individual, which later proved out that that didn't either, it's completely against liberty. All you're doing was
Yeah. Well,
infringing on people's liberty. It was like it was a control experiment to see how far you could push people, is what it feels like.
and what I found interesting, you were not a part of our company at the time that COVID hit, but I really appreciate what Bob and Jim's approach was. They said, we're going to do business because we're in a critical business and we will be coming to the office. However, they said, if you are uncomfortable as an employee, we will figure out a way that you can work from home and that you can continue to make the contribution to the company's goals. They would have been within their rights and I would have supported them if they said, no, you will show up. And if you don't show up, you will lose your job. But they chose not to do that. As it turned out, everybody showed up. A couple of people got COVID, including myself, but we managed it. We managed to. So
Yeah, I
we
showed
did
up in
not
the middle of the
need,
vaccine mandates and had to navigate a lot, but I was in the very free and individualistic Lockheed Martin at the time. That was
we did not need the government telling us how to run our businesses and how to make decisions for our own health.
yeah,
But
they did.
it was an opportunity for them to do so, and unfortunately, it happens far too often, I'm afraid. Let's go to the intelligence world, which you know a great deal about, because the position of the Libertarian Party is that intelligence agencies that legitimately seek to preserve the security of our nation must be subject to oversight and transparency. We oppose the government's use of secret classifications to keep from the public information that they should have, especially that which shows that the government has violated the law. You come from a much closer background, much closer experience with the intelligence agency. What's your feeling about that in
Yeah.
terms of how we handle intelligence and what restrictions we put on the intelligence agencies within this country?
Yeah, I listened to a podcast this morning, and on the way home, Tucker Carlson had a guy, Jim, his last name starts with an E, who just left the CIA, and he was a operations guy. He lived all over the world. He was very similar to my aunt in the roles that she had. Ironically, he showed up in 2013. That's kind of when she was fully out. She retired in 2003, but she consulted all the way up till 2013. And they had very similar roles in what he was doing and what she was doing. And he said, everything good in my life I can attribute to the CIA. I absolutely loved it. And then he got brought back to headquarters. And he left June 30th. He became a whistleblower. It is an absolute mess. The COVID mandates were a mess. But he and Tucker were talking about it, and Tucker's got ties to the intel community, and he admitted to that guy. Tucker applied, wanted to be in the CIA, and got turned down. I think I agree with him, and I think it becomes very nuanced. I think the CIA is a real problem right now with the lack of oversight. I think what they said, if it's in protection of the U.S., so foreign spying and all that, I'm all in. Let's go learn about that. But and that guy said it this morning. It was originally very clear the CIA had no reason to be operating in the United States. It was strictly a outward facing foreign intelligence gathering. That's since not been the case. And that's proven. That's not just theory of what's going on. But eventually, I think the biggest problem, to kind of sum up what I believe the problem is with all the intel communities, is when you look at something that's clandestine being done under the cover of dark, and you got all the tools in the world, you got a venture capital arm of the CIA where they're investing in businesses and deciding what they want to do in technology. Their entire budget is classified. There's two elected officials in the executive branch, and they have complete control, supposedly, of the CIA and the other intel pieces. But yet, good example, and that's what Tucker and this guy were talking about. Trump put out an executive order saying that all documents related to the JFK assassination, MLK, MK Ultra, all these things were to be released. And this guy said, look, I was part of moving the MK Ultra documents. He said, I've held them. And Tulsi, as DNI, was getting pushed back on big time. They were not allowing her to see things. They were dragging their feet. They're not doing it. And it's like Tucker said, at the end of the day, if Joe Rogan's not right, and on your first day as president, you get sat in a room and they show you the JFK assassination and tell you what really happened and say any questions. If that's not true, what Trump should do is when they don't release the documents, he goes to Kash Patel and said, hey, Kash, if I don't have this in 24 hours and they don't do what I said, go freaking arrest John Radcliffe, because he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Yet that doesn't happen. So you've got this clandestine, organization that can do anything they can meddle in foreign governments. They can have people killed. They do whatever they need to do. To think that they won't do that here. And he said, what you've got is a bunch of mid-level managers that have matriculated up. They're not leaders into these management roles. And even the deputy and the director of the CIA are not leading the CIA. It's similar to a lot of organizations you see throughout the government. The problem is the price of the CIA doing that is very high because of what they can do, what they are doing, what they're involved in. And that guy said, you've almost got a little country inside of a country that is not, there's no oversight. When you look at the House Intelligence Committee, Senate, Tom Cotton, he said, is the biggest pro cheerleader for the CIA and the intel community. It's not oversight. And then they get into, and he said the names that are used for all the different areas of the CIA are so obscure, you could never figure out anything anyway. The funding pathways, and the other problem is the CIA is not even funded fully by Congress, because they do have these business ventures. They had a freight company. Most people don't know this. They had an airline and a freight company for years. It was one of the largest freight companies in the freaking world that the CIA owned. So it's an absolute out of control organization that has no oversight. I don't know how you fix it, because JFK tried. It didn't go great. But I think you have to have oversight, especially with an organization that does things in the dark. Somebody, and the president, the way it's set up, should at least have oversight. But if it's using funding from the people and it's an organization of the people, then Congress should have oversight. But there is zero oversight of the intel. So at a very base level, I agree with libertarians. I think the CIA, NSA, FBI, they're all good in their original intent, what they're doing. I think the problem is they've been allowed to operate with zero oversight, and nobody knows what the heck they're doing. And I think it's very dangerous. I think it's the worst thing going on in our country right now. And it's got to get under control. The problem is, rarely do I have no ideas of a solution. I don't know how you fix it.
Right. No, I agree. And when you become untouchable, which
It's not
many of
healthy.
these three-letter acronym organizations have become, I don't know how you do it. It will take a concerted effort on the part of Congress, on the part of the administration,
It's got to happen
and
quick.
probably on the part of the military.
Well, and Justin and I were talking about it this morning. If you're going to do it, take JD Vance. I don't care. Take somebody who's relatively. I think JD would be a good candidate to try it. I worry about, he's a dad, so I don't know that I like the outcome of past president who tried to do that. It's going to take somebody that knows how to navigate the system well enough, and you're going to have to do it so freaking quick. You're going to have a director of the FBI. You're going to have maybe some military, and you're going to have a president, a vice president, all in a DNI who knows very quickly what they're going to do. And they're going to have to move so fast that those agencies don't even know what hit them to recalibrate them. Otherwise, they're going to surround you just like they're doing with Trump right now. And you're not going to be able to maneuver out of it. So it's a tough problem. And I think it's a major issue for our country right now, because to think that they're not controlling, and they got into it, if they control propaganda and media in other countries and elections and all the things they do, to think that they're not doing it here right now. When was the last time you saw a story on any news network of anything to do when you look at the director of the CIA, they just get confirmed. There's never even a discussion. The news doesn't cover it. Other than Marco Rubio, nobody gets, unanimously confirmed. And it's like, why? Why is that? Why is there not ever a story about, there's never any controversy there? It doesn't seem like it because nobody talks about it. So it's a problem, real problem. The
Well,
problem is this
and
one, I think some of the other ones might be a lot easier to unwind than this one. It's been going on. I mean,
well, and
since
we
the early
just
60s, it's been getting worse and worse, and it's
well, and
not.
as you know, until just this evening, we had an interim director of intelligence that was a CEO and knew nothing about it. I'm not real sure I'm sold on the guy that we just put in, but we'll see. But anyway,
But there's
let's
very
move
little
on
discussion
to
about it. I mean, there's really
that's right.
any other appointment, it's all this discussion. Those just is like, "Yep, whatever, good. Nobody knows who it is. Sure, keep doing." And it's like, that's the most powerful unchecked organizations in the country, and nobody
Right.
cares.
Right.
So,
Right.
anyway.
Let's talk about foreign policy and international affairs because there's a very the libertarians have a very I would say unique perspective as it relates to that. They start off with saying that American foreign policy should emphasize peace with all nations. And that's a great goal. Okay. I think everybody would agree if we could just have peace and no wars. They also say that we should never have entangling alliances with any country. Okay. They would end government policies of foreign intervention, including military and economic aid. They would stop all tariffs. They would stop all economic sanctions, and they would never attempt regime change. They say that they recognize the right of all people to resist tyranny and to defend themselves and their rights, but they do not believe that it's the United States' responsibility to do that for the people of other nations. They condemn the use of force, especially terrorism against the innocent, regardless of whether those acts are committed by governments or by political or revolutionary groups. So they say, we agree that those are all bad things that happen to people, but it is not the responsibility of the United States government to intervene in those instances. What do you think?
Yeah, and
I
I
mean,
mean, that gets back to even what we were talking about a little bit earlier with the genocide thing. And, in a perfect world, and if I were king for a day, I think a lot of those things gets down to help people if they ask. If they don't, leave them alone. And by who are the people? That can be the citizens. And especially today, citizens can speak out, and there's absolutely a way that you would know that the people want help. It's not little Kim calling and saying we won't help, but that one's a little bit of an extreme circumstance because they turn the power out every night. But I think if you don't get any signal from anybody in the country that they want you to come get involved, maybe you shouldn't get involved.
right. Right. And we unfortunately in our arrogance assume that the way we do it is right
Yep.
and the way everybody else does it is wrong. And that if women don't want to wear it, if women have to wear burqas, it's only because they're being forced to. They don't believe in it. They're miserable. And there may be some that are. But for us to make the assumption that they want to become like American women and have the rights to their own lives and their own professions and etc. I think that's extreme arrogance on our part. I think the other thing that we find throughout history is that most nations have gone through periods when their people were repressed by their government. The US may be one of the few that, and we were to a certain extent, but it was more taxation without representation. It was with a British government that was an ocean away, that was going to have a hard time keeping these wild, crazy people that had gone to the Americas under control anyway. It's a little bit tougher when you're talking about the repressive regimes that exist in many nations. But history is replete, again, with people who have risen up against those governments, and it has not worked out well for those who were in power when that happens. And I'm not sure that it is our responsibility as a nation to try to jumpstart that in these other countries that we believe people are being repressed in. And we may be right, but the timing and the amount of revolt and rebellion that occurs is not ours to determine, and it's not ours to trigger.
Yeah, on that one again,
And if
I
that
mean,
seems harsh, I'm
simplistically,
sorry.
well, and I agree, and I think simplistically, if they want help and they ask, we help, but otherwise, and
Mhm.
again, because where do you draw the line? And a lot of it is our arrogance if we think we always know better. And again, we kind of qualify this every time. I love this country. I love everything about it. I think it is the best, or I wouldn't live here anymore. But that doesn't mean that everybody agrees with us or they have to. There are multiple ways to be a human living on this rock, hurling through space. And I don't know that we're the arbiters of what is right and wrong with that. Again, there's a level of, if women and children are being abused physically, sexually, whatever, or you're killing your own people, yeah, that's a different discussion. But, form of government and, the laws and how you get to act and who has rights, I don't know that we're the arbiter of that or should be. We try to
Well,
be, but
and the other thing is, we got to be careful even when we respond when somebody asks us for help. Osama bin Laden asked us for help, and we granted him
yeah,
military hardware
yeah,
because he was opposing the Russians. We have supported Israel in certain actions because we were concerned
yeah.
about
Gaddafi, I
their
mean, we helped put
oppression
him.
from their surrounding neighbors.
Yeah, we've helped put a lot of leaders in place to make a situation better that ultimately we kill later. You and I have joked about this. If you get a call from the US that says, "Hey, I need you to be the interim leader of country X. We're going to put you in. We're going to overthrow the government. We're going to put you in." Don't take the call. It won't work out for you. It's, in some
Exactly.
number of years, it's going to end poorly for you. So,
Right. So let's talk. This one is really interesting, and it's one where, again, I go back and forth. The whole idea of free trade and how it affects things, even such as immigration. Okay, because that falls under this. Now, the libertarian position is that they support the removal of any governmental impediment to free trade. Political freedom, in their opinion, and escape from tyranny demand that individuals not be unreasonably constrained by the government in the crossing of political boundaries, which is basically their way of saying that. And they follow it up by saying economic freedom demands unrestricted movement of both human as well as financial capital across national boundaries. The position that I understand after doing a little bit of background research to see what exactly the position of the party is that there should be not unrestricted, but the ability for people to cross political boundaries, meaning across international borders, and not be unreasonably constrained. Now, that's an interesting term because they don't define what is a reasonable constriction of that freedom to cross boundaries. So, some people who oppose the libertarian position say, yeah, they just want to open up and they want free borders. Anybody can come across. And that is not what the Libertarian Party says. But the problem is they have not taken the next step to define what they think is reasonable constraining of people's ability to cross a border. And so in this particular arena, because we have so much of it's been in the news. It's such a big deal in terms of the border and securing the border. I'm sick and tired of hearing securing the border. If I'm a terrorist and I want to create a problem in the U.S., you ain't going to stop me at Laredo, Texas. Sorry. I will get in to your country and I'll do what I need to do. Has some of what we have done in terms of securing the border been beneficial? I would completely agree that yes. But I think to a large extent, it's a Band-Aid on a problem that has a different solution that could be much better. Now, you and I have talked about this before, and I live in this I dare not call this third world nation. That will get you in real trouble in Ecuador, but and what we call an emerging nation. And again, much of what we have here in Ecuador is decades behind the capabilities of a country like the United States. But they have a very clear and somewhat simple immigration stance. You can get a 90-day visa to come to Ecuador. And basically from most countries, that's just your passport. It doesn't even take a visa. And you can stay here for 90 days and then you have to leave. And there's a very clear pathway to getting a 2-year temporary residence if that's what you choose. And there are restrictions as to what you can do in terms of whether or not you can go, you can be educated here and at what level, whether or not you can run a business, own a business, be employed, etc. Very clear guidelines in terms of background checks to see guarantees of some sort of an income when you arrive here. After 2 years, you can get what's called a permanent residence visa. Once again, background checks to make sure you haven't broken any laws while you have been in the country, etc. Now, when it gets to the point of determining that you want to be a citizen. Now you must pass a language test, both written and verbal. And if you don't pass it, you don't become a citizen. So but it's very, very clear. It's very clearly delineated. And as much as they are capable of doing so, the intention is to prohibit people from coming in illegally. Not that that doesn't happen. To prohibit people from overstaying their visas. To make certain that people have certain, a clear background, at least from a criminal perspective, et cetera. I don't understand why. See, I'm in one of those that believes that anyone who wants to come in the United States to be able to come to the United States and live and perhaps work, depending on their reasoning, perhaps gain citizenship. But I do think that the steps should be very stringent. I was unaware until I went back and checked. I didn't realize that you could come to the United States on a tourist visa and it's good for 10 years. Now, you can only stay 6 months. I think 6 months is way too long. I can't believe that the United States allows someone to come in on a tourist visa and remain in the US for 6 months. Quite honestly, I think it ought to be no more than 90 days, perhaps 30. I'm going to sound really conservative here or crazy and off my rocker. I don't think you ought to be able to come to the United States as a foreigner and undertake college education. Sorry. Because there are people in the United States that are being denied entrance into universities and college programs, and we are allowing foreign students to come in and take those positions. I
Well, and
just don't think that that's right.
specifically, yeah, number and specifically China and Russia, who we know are taking our academia back to their countries and using it against us.
Sure.
So it's why are we
Right.
teaching our enemies how to ultimately fight us? No, I think I was thinking I've got some notes. The immigration, I put down more notes than anything else probably. I think a number of things. You hit on something. You went through what Ecuador's doing. You take Europe out of the mix for a minute because they're a bigger dumpster fire than we are as far as defining what a country is. Because
Right.
if you lose your borders and your language, not your culture, but because what is the US culture? The US culture is a mix of many
Sure.
different
Yeah.
cultures, which is fine. But if you lose your language and you lose your borders, you no longer have a country. You're just some land with people showing up. And what you just defined for Ecuador is a very set number of rules that are, by the way, enforced. And I think that's one of our big issues right now. And I don't think this is by accident. There is one party who believes, and it's part of the way they changed California and they're trying to do the nation. If you let people in and then you give them free stuff and you try to get them to be able to vote, guess who they're going to go vote for? The people who gave them free stuff. So
Sure.
there's zero. So if you look and you go back historically, and I've listened to an economist one time that had the best, because one of the knocks on border control and immigration controls and everything. Well, we didn't used to have that. 200 years ago, you didn't have that. And I heard this economist talk about it, and I've done a lot of research then. I went back and put a few things together. And I think there's a single biggest difference, which I also looked at what is the libertarians' take on social safety nets. So we used to have a list of how you came. And if you look at immigration patterns in the 19th century specifically, and then get into the 20th century, it was always big immigration followed by assimilation. And
Hmm.
a guy that I know well, ironically, his family's Greek, and he was telling me because I asked him about his last name. He's our student pastor at church, and his last name is Combos, but that's not his real last name. So his ancestors, his uncles and granddad, they immigrated from Greece, and when they did, they all changed their first names and they shortened their last name to become more
Right.
American because they wanted to be Americans. And so you used to see immigration followed by assimilation, and it's this very sawtooth pattern of immigration that happened for many years in the US. That's how you keep your country. And again, that doesn't mean you can't respect your culture and bring your culture and your food.
Right.
But if you're going to come here, you're going to speak English, just like you said in Ecuador. You're going to speak the language. You're going to be a productive citizen. You're going to get a job. The major difference between those times and all the people like, well, there used to not be, you didn't have all the border control. People came in. Yeah, there's a huge difference. They came for opportunity to work and make their family better. Now
Right.
you've got major, numbers of people, huge numbers that are criminals. Countries are, and Trump's right. I mean, he sounds like an idiot when he says it sometimes, but they are sending people out of their prisons. They're emptying their freaking prisons out and they're not sending their best people from some of these
Right.
countries. And so not only that, but then you look at kind of the next level, they're not people coming for opportunity. They're people coming because their buddy told them, if you come here, you're going to get a cell phone and you're going to get a paycheck and you're going to get free medical care. So in a country with Medicaid and social safety nets and welfare, you cannot have open borders. The economy won't work. The economics that California is a good example. Free education, all the things when you're not paying into the tax dollars and you're taken out, it won't work. You go broke. And that's this economist I heard is the first time I really heard anybody talk about, well, yeah, you did used to have more open borders. It was easier to come here, but people came here for opportunity to work to make their family better. They didn't come here to suck the life out of this place. And so
Which tells you,
libertarians,
though, that
well, libertarians
the
also
the
don't believe in
problem
the social safety nets. They don't believe in welfare, all that. So you would
right.
have to implement that
Yeah.
before you did their second piece of border control. If you did that, I think they're absolutely right. And we saw probably 100 years of that work very well. You don't, we've talked about this, communities and churches and other people looked after their own and their community. And you didn't have a million people homeless in a city sleeping on the streets, building tents. Communities took care of their own people. It worked out. People worked. Well, that works until you create the social safety nets and other people find out they can come here to take advantage of the country. You can't, those two, they can't work together.
problem is, I mean, you're right. Number one, that is a big part of it because that is part of the attraction is this, what particularly if you're coming from a third world country and
Yes.
poverty, the little bit that you could get from social services in the United States is more than you would ever get in your own country anyway.
And I don't blame the
But
people for it. At the end of the day, Joe Rogan says this all the time, and I fully agree. If I was one of those people and I'm stuck in Guatemala and my freaking kids can't eat and everything else, by golly, I'd be walking my ass to the United States to get mine. So I don't blame them. If I were in the same scenario and I had a wife and two kids, I'd be walking and be figuring out how to do it to send them money back. I'd probably try to
Our
work, but
problem is our problem is the process, and
yes,
I can speak to that as we've talked about it previously. Because my daughter is an immigrant, because she came from Cambodia to the United States, and I came to realize that how screwed up the entire system was, and how no one really understands it, including immigration and naturalization, as they
it's
called it
terrible.
back then,
Yeah,
INS, before it became ICE.
yeah.
Nobody understood it. What they did know is that because I made a certain amount of money, that it became, and because because I had the support of people from both the Senate and the House of Representatives writing letters on my behalf, my daughter's citizenship in the United States was very easy. But I also ran across a number of people who had tried to go through every step that was in the process, and nobody understood where they even stood in terms of the process. And
Well,
it
I've
was
got a
taking
number of
years
friends,
and years.
Randy, specifically from Canada because they played hockey at UAA, some really close friends of mine that I watched go through the process and drive over to Atlanta to INS because they got a meeting. And the people don't even show up to meet with them. I mean, it is some friends from India, same thing I used to work with that became citizens and listening to how difficult it is. It's like they don't even want you to do it legally. They got the worst
Right.
people in the world that are kind of your first impression of the United States to go through the process. They're miserable because they had to go to work. It's terrible. It's almost impossible to make it happen.
But then you've got, and not to come down on our president, I do that enough, but when he goes in and offers what was it, a golden visa or something, as long as you give a few $1,000,000 to something in the US, then you
Yeah.
can buy your way in.
Yeah.
That is absurd.
Yeah.
Okay. There needs to be a process, a policy, and everyone, I don't care who you are,
Well, a
and I don't
simple,
care what you
effective
might,
it needs to be simple, effective, and enforceable. Which
right.
is what you laid out in
Exactly.
Ecuador. It's not a 400-page document. It's a
Right.
couple of pages of some thou shalls, and it's easy to understand of your pathway to do all these different things, and then it's enforceable, and then it is enforced. And again, the biggest problem we have here, two biggest problems is the system is so screwed up. If you actually want to become a citizen the right way, it's damn near impossible. The other piece is if you don't and you just want to come here, there is a political party right now who is incentivizing people to come here, and they're just ignoring anything to do with the fact that we've got a country. So
Well, I've always held, Carl, the belief that the reason that so many things within our government are so complicated, so complex, is because someone out there is manipulating the system, deliberately making it complex and very difficult, if not impossible, to understand because it benefits them and their agenda.
well,
It's
those
like people who
bureaucrats have
love
to have a job. If
chaos.
you make it hard,
Yeah.
it's the IRS, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I know what the libertarians think about the IRS. It shouldn't exist, But think about it. I mean, why is it so freaking hard to do our taxes? Why do we need, 85,000 or however many IRS agents they were going to hire? Why do you need any of them? It shouldn't be that difficult. It's simple math.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
I agree. But whole industries and
Well,
bureaucracies get justified with very complex
sure.
things that should be pretty simple.
Sure. No, absolutely. Let's go to rights and discrimination. This is an interesting concept, and I had to think a little bit about what to use as an example. Libertarians believe that people are born with certain inherent inalienable rights. Okay. But they reject the idea that a natural right can impose an obligation on others to fulfill that right. So I was trying to think of an example, and this will probably make some people angry, but I don't care. The idea of reparations, okay? The fact that African Americans, slaves, were horribly mistreated. Their rights were taken from them. Everything they had was taken from them. And it was absolutely ethically, morally, at the time, unfortunately, not legally wrong. But don't come to me and
I didn't
tell
do that.
me that
Neither did you. Yeah,
I don't have to right that wrong.
yeah.
I'm
I didn't
sorry.
do it. I didn't do it.
And that's basically what the Libertarian Party is saying here. They say that the government should not deny or abridge anyone's human rights based on their sex, their wealth, their ethnicity, their creed, their age, their national origin, their personal habits, their political preferences, or their sexual orientation.
Well, a good simple one
Those
was
should
the
all be hands off, but it's not my job to right
yeah, I
the
agree.
wrongs that have taken place,
Well,
against those groups.
the simplest one that I think has happened in the last, I don't know, it seems like it's 2 years ago. It's probably 10 years ago now. Was when gay marriage was really becoming popular, and it was I think it was in Utah, the bakery that didn't wanna bake a cake for the gay couple, and they were being forced to. That's a perfect
Right,
example of that because
right,
the bakery did not care that they got married or not, had no effect on them. They just didn't wanna bake them a cake, and for the government or anybody to impose that there was discrimination and the bakery had to bake a cake for them is exactly what they're talking about, and to me,
right,
that's what I've said a lot. I really don't care. I want everybody to have their inalienable rights. I don't care if you're trans, gay, black, white, green, purple, don't care. Everybody should get those. At the point that you start pushing your rights so much that they infringe on mine, you just did the same thing to me that you're complaining about. So you don't
right.
get more rights than I
Absolutely.
do. I get to bake a cake for you or not bake a cake for you. And it's my decision. Just like if you're gay and you want to get married, I think you should be able to if you want to. Don't care. But at the point where you start forcing other people around you to give you a special treatment and it's infringing on their liberty, then that's where the foul starts. And I think that's exactly what they're talking about. I fully agree.
Right,
Everybody
right.
gets there.
They also
You don't get to overplay your whatever group you're part of and say, "Oh, we've been discriminated against, therefore we get to do this." Well, that doesn't mean you get to overplay your liberties to infringe upon my liberties.
right. They use an example. They say members of private organizations, private clubs, retain their rights to set whatever standards of association that they deem appropriate. And which means that if I want to keep women out of my club or African Americans, I can't imagine why anyone would do this. But if that's my choice, they say they are free to do that. However, individuals are also free to respond with ostracism, with boycotts, and other free market solutions. So you can make that club's life miserable, and that's your right as an individual, but you cannot force, the government cannot force private clubs to open their doors to people that are sexes or sexual orientations or whatever.
I heard the
And yet
funniest
that's certainly not the government we find ourselves facing today.
I heard the funniest thing. I think it was Tom Segura in his last stand-up special was talking about that exact thing. He was talking about Augusta National, and he said, "So, all right,
Yeah.
I've got a question for you. So, when was the first black, admitted to become a member at Augusta National?" And I think it was, I don't know. It seems like it was 1990. It was more recent than what you would think. He's like,
Right.
"Okay, that's good." He said, "So they went through that and they finally did. Good. Took a lot longer than they should have." He said, "But now I've got another question for you. When was the first woman a member?" That was actually Condoleezza Rice and the former
That was
CEO of IBM.
Condoleezza, wasn't it?
And
Yeah.
that was recently. And he said, "So I think," he said, "because what I believe is the way the blacks and the history of Augusta, and there was some animosity there, but they believe that women were so annoying. It took like 30 more years to let women in." it was pretty funny. I'm like, that's pretty bad, but it's actually what they did. So, but they were just a lot of theirs was, I don't think, because there's an interesting history to Augusta. If you look at a lot of the people that work at Augusta, the caddies, a lot of people work there are black, and they're paid very well and they're treated very well. And I've seen some interviews with them recently. It's pretty amazing. I think that was simply a bunch of set in their ways rich dudes who, the more you told them what they were going to do, they were just going to stick up their middle finger and say, we'll buy all the TV rights. You're not going to tell us what we're going to do. We'll decide what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and it'll be on our timeline. It was nothing
Yeah.
more than that, at least in
Well,
the
that's,
recent years. A long time ago,
they
clearly
have
it was
said
something
that
more.
they've made that very clear to the television networks. You will have X number of commercials and that's it. And they will occur only at these times. And you know what? If you don't like it, we'll have our little tournament and we won't televise it.
That's right.
We
They
don't
don't.
care
Well, it's like when, what was her
because they're
name?
rich enough that, yeah,
Well, when the lady was, what was her name? I can't think of her dang name, but it was my favorite time to watch the Masters because when she was giving them grief about not having a woman member and they had all the protests and they're going to speak it, Augusta bought all the TV time. So it was brought to you uninterrupted by the members of Augusta because they said they didn't want to put any of their sponsors through that. I'm like, that was like the best 2 years ever of the
right,
Masters because there were no freaking commercials. So, yeah.
right. The Libertarian Party has sort of take on representative government. You and I have talked a little bit about this already, but they believe that everyone has the right to petition the government to redress grievances and to express their dissent. I can buy that to a certain point. They say that these rights are thwarted when the government acts behind closed doors. They support election systems that are more representative of the electorate at the federal, state, and local levels. Now, we're not going to get into a description of what this means, but they are big proponents of proportional representation, as opposed to if someone gets 51% of the vote, they represent the entire state. And they point to most other governments in the world other than the United States who use a form of proportional representation. They agree wholeheartedly. They support alternative voting systems, the explicit inclusion of none of the above on all ballots. They believe that political parties should be free to establish their own rules for nomination procedures for primaries and for conventions, that that's none of the federal government's business. That is a states' rights issue.
Well, they should have been
They
very
call
happy
for
with
an
the last Democratic nomination of Kamala Harris because they made up the rules and did it how they want. So the Libertarians should be good with that.
they call for an end to any tax finance subsidies to candidates or parties. They call for the repeal of all laws that restrict voluntary financing of election campaigns. So if you want to give, if some mega billionaire or trillionaire, as we have now with Elon, if he wants to give $5 billion to someone's campaign, libertarians say that's his right. The government should not be restricting that.
Well, the problem is all this
They
campaign finance reform.
Mhm.
It's similar to the Department of Education. I mean, we've had that conversation before. Whatever the name of something is, generally means they're doing the opposite of that. Campaign finance reform has done nothing to reform campaign finances at
No,
all.
not at all.
It's
No.
not even close.
It's shifted where the money comes from and how it's kinda like NIL,
It's more of a rigged game now.
in
Yeah,
college football. Yeah.
it hasn't reformed it at all.
They oppose laws that exclude alternative candidates and parties. That would make sense from the Libertarian
Yeah.
Party. Anything that denies ballot access, that gerrymanders districts, or denies voters the right to consider all alternatives. I will tell you this, that if you went to their proportional representation, gerrymandering would disappear
Yeah, yeah,
because you couldn't control it
that's right.
in that scenario. They advocate, and here I got a little bit of a problem with this because I don't know how you carry it out and manage to effectively run a government. They advocate initiative, referendums, recall, repeals, and they oppose any effort to deny these options when used as popular checks on government. Do you restrict the number of recalls, the number of repeals? I mean,
It
to me, that
seemed
becomes very difficult to manage.
Well, it seems anti-libertarian. Most hands, they're open and let things play out how they are, but this, they're putting a lot of restriction on it. So I don't understand why.
I don't either. I mean, because I understand the philosophy behind this. Okay. We should be able to put initiatives before the people. We should be able to hold referendums. We should be able to recall bad actors in the political realm. We should be able to repeal certain laws that are in opposition to our individual freedoms. But what they haven't told us is, how are you going to do this? How often should it happen? What should be the circumstances that set this up? Who is going to oversee these? And they just kind of throw this out there, but they don't give us any process, any procedure for how, when, and how these things would be carried out.
I think that I think you bring up an interesting point on this one. To me, again, if I had to say I was going to side with anything, I would most closely align with libertarian principles, because at the heart of it, I'm mostly a constitutionalist because I believe what's in there works. I think the problem is that's an ideology. It's kind of a what you believe, not a how you're going to do it. To me, a lot of the problems with what I see with a lot of this stuff in the libertarians, in all of their documents and their beliefs. Yeah, I think it sounds great in practice, a lot of it. The how the heck you're going to do it, this is a great example. They don't give you a manual on how to implement it. It sounds like a lot of theory, and it sounds really good in
Right,
theory. How the hell you're going to do all this stuff in practice? There's no manual on how to make all that happen. And I think that's one of my big
right,
problems, because again, I love a lot of this. I think it would be awesome. Hey, by the way, geniuses, could you give us a how you're going to actually make this happen? And I think that's part of the reason libertarians struggle, in addition to the
right,
campaign finance reform that's rigged the two-party system into being only two parties and not three. I think they struggle when it gets into the application of how you're actually going to implement this. I don't think there's good answers on how you're going to do it, because I
right,
think it's very hard.
right.
I think that's where they struggle some.
And I will tell you that I would say the same thing about their final paragraph under Section 3, and it's self-determination. Once again, I understand where they're coming from, but they say, whenever any form of government becomes destructive to individual liberty, it's the right of the people to alter, to abolish, or to withdraw from it, and to agree to such new governance or none as to them which shall seem most likely to protect their liberty. We recognize the right of political self determination, including secession. Exercise of this right does not require permission from others. So if I disagree with the direction that my government is going, I can just withdraw.
Sure.
Okay,
Sounds great.
who's going to support that? Who is going to protect my right?
That's right.
I'm now going to call on government, which I have withdrawn from, to protect my right to withdraw from the government.
Yeah.
I
And you're just
just
not going to pay
I
taxes. So
understand what there's
they're going to give you a free place to live when you do that. You're going to go to jail.
right. No, I would say this takes us back to American independence. When I get to a point that my individual liberties are being infringed upon by the government, then I've got to have a revolution, and I'm not going to do it on my own. I mean, our founding fathers withdrew from England
Yes.
and from that oppressive government,
Yep.
but they did so together. And so, once again, this is one of those things that philosophically may make sense, but nobody's telling the party is not telling us how you can do this. And this brings us kind of to at least the conclusion on this. I said this from the very beginning. I don't think that the Libertarian Party has figured out how to finance its campaign, how to get its message out, how to get elected. There are very, very few libertarians that have been elected even at the local levels.
Yeah.
What
And
I
again,
am
I think it's a
hoping,
great theory. I just think
right?
that bridging theory and reality, that's the difference in physics and engineering. Physics is great, it's theory. The application of that is engineering. To me, the libertarians they're physics and they don't have engineering yet to go say how you're going to put this in practice.
No, I would agree. And that's why I think that maybe the hope is that some of these ideas, which do make sense and which I think do protect our individual liberties that the Constitution was written to protect, perhaps these ideas can be picked up by independents, by centrist leaning Democrats and Republicans, and through the mechanism that exists that, quite honestly, I'm not sure we can undo. Perhaps we can modify what's happening and quit swinging so far from the right to the left and come and focus back on what is best for the individual, and for the individual's the protection of the individual's liberties. Maybe we can pick some of that up, and we can figure out a way with smart people who are in positions of government to start including this. Right now, it's going to be very difficult because this does not align with the left or the right.
Well, I think humor me on this for a second. And you and I've talked about this. If you take Trump the person and the figure out for a second and set him aside. If you look at his policies that he ran on and kind of the policies of the first term, and you sit down and you take people off of it, his policies were closest to Bill Clinton's, which was the most centrist president we've had
Right.
in my lifetime. Trump's
Right.
policies were the same
Right.
way.
I would
And
agree.
and
I would
then what
agree.
he ran on, because I agree with you, take the figure and it annoys me more and more. You and I'll agree more and more on that as we go throughout this term. But if you look at what he ran on this time, again, not the bombastic words, but the legitimate what was the coalition? And it's something Tucker and Megyn Kelly, who both of them sold their souls for him. And Tucker's exact words were, "Now I feel like I came home and caught my wife with a pool boy."
And Marjorie Taylor Greene
Yeah.
even.
Well, and Tucker said, "Now I feel like I came home and caught my wife with a pool boy. That's how betrayed I feel." And Megyn Kelly's has kind of said the same thing. But why did he create this coalition with Bobby Kennedy? He and Megyn Kelly could not stand each other, and Tucker. Well, if you look at again the policy that was being put forth that would be implemented if he were elected, it was the most centrist, America first, no foreign war, smaller government, roll back the intel. It was all the things that it was the most comprehensive that aligned with this, other than Ross Perot, of anybody that ran. And it was freaking attractive because it was very centrist. That's how that coalition of a Democrat who his family banished him from it, and Megyn Kelly, all these people from all across all these different political backgrounds, Republicans and Democrat. Tulsi was an independent.
Tulsi Gabbard, yeah.
She was a
Went from
Democrat who
being a
became
Democrat
independent.
to an independent, right?
Absolutely. So how did you get all of that? It wasn't some of it's Trump's personality, because those people did. I don't think they all like him right now. They're all very frustrated with him, but it was very attractive and they all liked being around him and they liked what he was doing and what he was saying. The problem is now it's damn near 0% of what he said is he actually doing. And that's a whole different debate of why. I don't know that anybody knows why.
Well, I think part of it is he discovered that governing is hard.
Yeah,
I don't care how much money you have or what your successes or what you perceive your successes in the past to
yeah.
be. I don't care what kind of a negotiator you think you are. That doesn't matter.
Set all
It
that
is
aside, though.
hard.
Set all that aside. My whole point of that wasn't whether he's not doing it, but forget about that for a minute. I think my point I was making is I think that's attractive. I think the libertarian methodology that is very pro liberty, pro people, pro individual, less big government. He won as big as anybody's won in a long time based on a list of things that were most closely aligned to that of anybody we've seen in a long time, probably since Bill Clinton.
I
And so whether he's doing it or not, but
I would
it
agree.
was that platform. And that's why, to your point, if they could figure out how to get somebody to freaking market it well and say, here's how we're going to do it and come up with a message, an implementation plan, it might actually be a pretty good plan. It's just between the two-party system, and you're either going to have to run as a Republican mask as a libertarian or a Democrat mask as a libertarian. You're not going to get in the game because they're going to ice you out like Bernie Sanders and everybody else that it's happened to. But I think the platform, most people don't know what a libertarian even is or what it stands for. You and
Right.
I both have said for
Right.
years we closely align. You and I didn't understand it to the level of detail we do now, but
Right.
I don't think people understand it. I don't think it's attractive, and I don't think there's an implementation plan. But I think Trump just ran on probably the closest thing on a Venn diagram to the libertarian principles of anybody specifically around foreign policy and America first. That's what a lot of it's pro-human liberty and pro-American. And that was his main
Right.
thing, and
And here's the thing, though. I agree with you, and I think that was what made him attractive, and he promoted that and said, "We've got to tear apart the way our government has been run because nobody's listening to you." The problem that I have is that was a sales pitch,
yeah, we're not
and
doing
I
it.
don't think he ever believed it. I don't,
Well,
at the
I
end of
don't
the
even
day,
know because
he is one of
the piece I
he's one of
don't
those
know.
that says he basically is saying, "Trust me, I know what's better for you.
Yeah, I don't.
I know what's better for the country, and you guys just shut up. You're all, nobody's as smart as me. Nobody's ever done anything as great as I have done." And that's a personal flaw. I agree though that he took because he's always been great at branding. I always said I don't think Trump is very smart. I really don't. And everybody that says, "Oh yeah, he just knows how to manipulate," no, I don't think he's that smart. But I do think he would have been a great VP of marketing He's great at branding. He's great at presenting a message that resonates. I think he recognizes people's level of frustration and he knows how to play to that. At the end of the day, he wants to be king. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay. And he thinks he's a benevolent king, but he wants to be king and he doesn't like being questioned by anyone, including people within his own circle.
Yeah.
And so I think he had a good idea. I think what he sold, I agree with you,
Well, I don't think, and
was
this is
good.
from one of his top people in his original campaign when it wasn't even a campaign. He never wanted to be president. He wanted to run a campaign that put him a close number two, get the hype from it. He did it every time. He would always talk about
Yeah,
being
I know.
president.
And he said, and he
And then
wanted to do a network.
accidentally you end up getting it. And then it's like, oh crap, you got it. Then he liked it once he got it because it's powerful and it's cool.
Right.
But I'm not even going to
Right.
question all his personal motives. I don't care about any of that. I think the problem is the American people want what he was selling. There are a bunch of disenfranchised
Right.
people. He did do a phenomenal job of selling it. He accidentally got everybody rallied behind him and they're kind of carrying him down the street and then he can't even get off their shoulders at this point. Why it didn't happen, I don't even know. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It isn't happening. I believe some of it's probably what you're saying. I believe the bigger part of it is the machine is protecting itself because I do
Is
believe,
there someone who
because I don't believe
is
it
there
was
someone
just
out there that can
him.
pull this off?
Well, take him off the mixer, and I do believe in people like Tulsi Gabbard. I do believe in some of the people in I believe in Bobby Kennedy. That dude gave up a career as a lawyer to do what he's done, and his whole career as law is cleaned up water and helped people. He gave up a presidential run to go do that, and that dude cannot get anything done. So again, you don't like Trump. I don't really care. I've never met him, don't care. I think the problem is he sold that. He knew it was an attractive message. I do think at least people in his administration will agree to disagree on whether he did or not, because I don't know. But people in his administration for sure did. Tulsi Gabbard did. Bobby
Mhm.
Kennedy did. I believe that they were passionate about what they were doing and they gave up a lot to get there. And they've made zero ground because the machine is pushing back so hard on them, it's protecting itself because the libertarian principles
Right.
are not big government. And I think that's the biggest
Right.
headwind. Sure, it's harder than what he thought. I believe that's the case. I think he thought he could do more. I think everybody in that administration thought they could do more. And they're finding out the unelected bureaucrats are not allowing them to do anything. You know,
Do you think
I don't know how you get there.
Vance could move us further down the road,
The reason I like
or is
JD
he
a
going to
lot
find himself?
well, the reason I like JD a lot, he's 42 years old. He's a strong person. He's been raised in an interesting bring up with his grandma, and he didn't have an easy life. I think he is tough. I think he's been through hard things. You and I talked about that earlier. The United States is things are pretty easy here, pretty soft. I think he knows that. He's a Marine, 42 years old. I think he's been in politics long enough to understand how to navigate it. Similar to what happened between Trump's first term, he didn't know how to navigate politics. He figured it out. And then I think he thought it would be easier, and it hasn't been any easier because it's just hard and you're trying to maneuver this big machine that doesn't want to be maneuvered. I think it's going to take somebody like JD. I think the Trump administration moved it so far and they've hit a wall now. The immovable object is beginning to win and nothing is happening. I think Marco Rubio can't do it because if you put him in the room with 25 people, he starts looking a lot like whatever those 25 people are. He's a chameleon. I think JD does have a backbone. I think he's the more professional, attractive version of the policies, the centrist, smaller government policies that Trump's trying to do. So maybe he could get a coalition of people, Republicans and Democrats, John Fetterman. And I think there's some people that are trying to be centrist that you're going to have to get a critical mass. And the problem is Trump by nature, and it's not even all his fault. He is clearly one of his own worst enemies because of stupid things he says. But by nature, he can unite people around him. On a grander stage, he's not a unifying character. Whether the news media is his problem, whatever, he just is not. We can argue about who is responsible for that, and clearly he plays a big part of it. I think it's going to take somebody who can unify and somebody who can get a coalition, which it looked like Trump had, and then it starts falling apart because of different things. I'm not ready to give up like Sean Ryan is, and Tucker's kind of ready to give up. I'm not ready to give up, but I think if JD got elected in 28 and you watch kind of what happens through those first 4 years, if we don't advance the ball back towards smaller government, some of the libertarian principles, the things we've been talking about, I think we're screwed. And I don't think the good news is God's in control. No human's going to come save us. When we
Right.
decide that a
Absolutely.
human's going to, we've got a problem. But in the
Right.
experiment we call self-governance in the United States, if that's going to survive, I think if a centrist, and I really don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat, because JD is interesting. I mean, he's more liberal than a lot of people that have run on the Republican platform in some social areas, I believe. I think he's leaning into his Catholicism, which I think is intriguing. He's just written his book. He's on the tour with that.
Mhm.
But I really don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat because that doesn't matter to me. But I believe JD is a centrist. I think he's a small government kind of person. I think he's the more polished, professional, intelligent version of Trump and what Trump said. And so what I would like to, because I always have faith that things can be better, clearly they align a lot on policy. Maybe not foreign policy, and he talked about that with Iran. But again, he aligns with what Trump originally believed. Whatever hijacked Trump to believe we need to go fight Iran, clearly there became a divergence in that. But Tulsi and JD and Trump all agreed no new wars. I mean, that was a big thing. But I think he's on par with the policies that were popular. And I would like to be hopeful that in the implementation piece of it, he could get more of a coalition to actually do things and maybe get there. But again, it's similar to what we talked about with the intelligence community. You've got so many unelected bureaucrats running this country right now. Elon tried it. Elon's not even a politician, and look how well that went for him.
Mhm.
It's just
Yeah.
you've got a frozen group of people that are stuck in their ways that think they run this country, and nobody elected any of them. And they don't turn over every
Mhm.
4 years. They've been there for 20, and they just wait it out, and they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And I think that's going to be hard to. It's going to take somebody strong. I would love to see JD and Tulsi run together. JD get 8 years and Tulsi get 8 years, and at the end of that, if we
Mhm.
if we didn't get any better, we're screwed. Our
Then we're
grandkids are
screwed.
completely screwed. So
Well, I'll tell you what I'm looking for, and I don't know that he exists out there. If we had somebody who had the ability to connect with people like Bill Clinton, the political savvy of Ronald Reagan, the ability to articulate that we had from Obama.
and
If we could find that in one
somebody as
person,
good looking as JFK, because the Democratic Socialists are proving it. If you
right,
look good and you speak well,
right,
so I think somebody that looks as good as
right.
JFK, smooth as Obama, Clinton. I don't know who that person is. I don't know that they.
I don't either. I certainly don't see them right now, but right now, because I don't think the Democrats have anyone that gets me excited at all.
It's
I'm not sure
between
they know
Gavin
what they
Newsom and
want.
AOC. AOC is starting to pull up there right now. That's
Yeah.
going to be
Well,
intriguing.
that would be an embarrassment. But right now, JD, the one thing that I give him credit for, and even Tulsi also, they have been willing to oppose the president,
Yes, and they've done
and
it in a way.
that takes guts.
Trump could fire Tulsi. He didn't. He never did. I mean, and she opposed him really hard and pushed back really hard
Mhm.
behind closed doors in the right setting. He can't fire JD. He could make his life miserable probably, or just send him out to the pasture to do nothing. But he hasn't. He continues to give him more and
Right.
more reign. He appears to be the front runner in Trump's, eyes right now to be his
I think
successor.
so.
And I think Trump respects him because I think he does it the right way. He does it not in a back. I think he's got the balls to go sit down with Trump in his office and say, "Sir, here's what I
But
think."
he's not trying to embarrass him.
No, and he
He's not
proved that
trying
on
to
Rogan.
embarrass him
The
with the
way
public.
he answered that
Yeah,
question of making it very non-confrontational, he said, "Just go listen to what the president said about what I said. It's very public, but I'm going to support him. He's my boss." I mean, I thought it was a phenomenal answer what he gave. I think he's done it the
right.
right way. And Trump's got a history of if you piss him
Mhm.
off, he's going to fire you. Again, he can't fire JD, but he sure could take him off the world stage and let him quit getting all the press he's getting, and he's not doing it.
Right,
So,
right. Now,
uh,
and I get the impression, I could be wrong about him, but that if JD reached a point where he simply could not agree with the president, I think he'd quit.
I, I
I really think he'd resign.
I believe that, and he could go back into private industry and be fine. I mean, and he jokes about it. He's like, I don't. This life is so bizarre, with cars following me everywhere, all the things that happen because he's only been in politics for a few years. He's so
Right.
new into it. It still kind of blows his mind. I believe, but I think now you're starting to see the book tour and the posturing. They're getting him ready, and I think late this year, early next year, he announces the run. You can see the lead up to what they're doing,
No, I think so. I think
but
so.
I really wasn't sure he would do it. They just had their kid, he and Usha. I mean, I believe he leaves it up to her that she has a big say in it. And I think she must now be okay with it. And I think Charlie Kirk getting killed as close as he was to him, because he said Charlie is the one he called first when he was going to run for Senate. And I think there's something that he wants to take up what Charlie was trying to do, and think there's a responsibility he feels. And he and Usha probably want to keep going. I think that's part of what, if Charlie were still alive, he might be the one that ran next. But I think there's something to do with that as well, that's got his family united behind, yeah, I think we're going to keep
Uh,
doing this. So,
yeah.
because
Charlie might have been too polarizing. I think JD
well, Charlie
is
couldn't have done it yet. He was too young. It was gonna be a mature Charlie in 10 years. Charlie
right,
was the most
right,
influential person. Charlie was the one, and this is where you start seeing how it fell apart. Susie Wiles has said this. A number of JD has said it. The single person who put that coalition together that convinced Bobby Kennedy to give up his campaign, it was Charlie Kirk. He's the one that did all that. He was the puppet master. He had the pro-Israel, anti-Israel, all them together. He was the one making all that happen. And it's interesting now that he's gone, how it's kind of fallen apart. And you see more that he was the glue holding it together. So, yeah, I don't know. I think the libertarian agenda is a good one. I think the how is a hard one. And I think
right.
it's being even proven out with what Trump's tried to do in his administration is he ran on a lot of those things, and it's not being received with open arms.
Well, the one thing that as we've discussed this and as I've looked at this, it has changed the way that I'm looking at candidates. And I'm now looking at them from the perspective of how many of these libertarian principles, philosophies are being articulated by these people, or are we seeing someone who's moving exactly in the opposite direction?
Yeah.
And
Well, I think something that's important with that lens, Randy, I mean, and I'm curious your thoughts. If I rank everything in importance that the libertarian, everything that they've put in there, and I look at all the founding documents, it really is who is pro liberty, who
right,
is pro American human liberty, and no
right,
more big government. And I'm not smarter than you, so I'm going to tell you how you need to live your life. I want more taxes to take your
right,
money because you're too stupid to figure out how to spend it. That's kind of the
right,
thing. That's the lens when I look at it is like,
right,
who is at least saying the things, and we don't know till they get in to do it. But
right,
that's not what I see out of the Democratic Socialist. You're too stupid. We're going to take your money. We're going to figure out how to tell you to live. That lens I don't like a lot at all. It
right,
really is who's more pro liberty. Who is, we
right,
don't need a huge government. We don't need to be fighting all these wars. That's kind of the lens, but liberty is at the top of that list. Who's infringing on it?
right,
Whether it's the Second Amendment or it's taxes or whatever the heck it is, who's proposing policies that are going to take away more of my family's rights versus who is saying, we trust you to make good decisions. We want to support you. That,
right.
that's,
Right. No, absolutely. That is the lens. And that I think I've kind of down deep, I've felt that for a long time, but I think I've put that lens aside, maybe feeling to a certain level hopeless that we were ever going to see it. So I think I've spent too much time over the last maybe 4 election cycles of looking at which is the lesser evil.
well, the other thing is,
And I'm
I
not
don't
going to do
care
that
about the
anymore. I'm not
person.
going to do that anymore.
Well, and this is the thing, and Trump is an example, and you and I have talked about him for a long time. I don't care about the personality that much. That is a piece of it for sure, and I'd rather have a good personality that seems to be able to make it happen. But I try to look at what are they saying policy wise? Because at the end of the day, I don't have to have dinner with them. I'm not going to be friends with them. I'm not going to hang out with them. I'm not going to travel with them. But who is at least, because we got to start from what they're saying because they're not going to do what they say anyway. But at least if they start somewhere and they deviate from it, it's not as far, is what are the policy? And I've gone to try to look at everybody's website for every election I look at. I was like, all right, what are they saying they're going to do? If we kind of start there, and the problem is it's easy, especially with social media and the debates and podcasts, to get caught up in the personality. If you do that, hell, we should just, Gavin Newsom's pretty good used car salesman. Let's vote for him. But what are they saying and what does their record say they're going to do? I think we got to look at that pretty strongly. And unfortunately, we're pretty superficial and, how somebody looks and they speak eloquently. I don't care. I don't care at all. What's their policy going to be?
Right.
Because, yeah, I agree. If
Right.
we could get a good
No,
looking, articulate, smooth, politician who can play the saxophone and, you know, that would all be great. I don't know that person wants to be. I think that person would rather be in private industry making a lot more money with less headaches. So,
right, right. Well, Andrew, this has been an interesting series here,
yeah,
and
I've
it
enjoyed it.
certainly gives us something to think about as we roll into not only the midterms but 2028, and it's gonna start getting wild. But the nice thing is that we've got NC2A football coming up to distract us.
Well, that
So,
should be a more unifying discussion. So,
right. Anyway, well,
good.
listen, this has been great, and
Yeah,
I look
love it.
forward to next week.
Yes,
But
sir.
anyway, I'll be talking with you further. But I appreciate the insights and glad to have you back on firm footing in the U.S.
Good to be back. Enjoyed it.
Okay, we'll talk to you later,
All right.
bud.
See ya.
Take care.